The china gleamed under the chandelier, the silverware lined as neatly as soldiers. I had polished each piece myself once, back when these dinners felt like family instead of theater. Now, at 71, I sat at the end of the table, watching my daughter pour wine as though I were merely another guest. Celia's voice cut the air with the sharpness of a knife. From today, consider yourself a stranger. Don't come back. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The words rang against the crystal, echoed in my bones. My fork stilled above the lamb on my plate. Across the table, her husband cleared his throat but didn't speak. My grandchildren stared at their peas, eyes lowered, as though silence could protect them. Stranger. The word slipped out of me like a breath. My throat burned, but I refused to let it crack. Celia leaned back in her chair, composed, satisfied. This house is mine now. I've already had the locks changed. You'll find your key won't work anymore. I gripped my napkin until it wrinkled. In the cedar chest at my friend Agnes's attic, the original deed still bore my name. I had kept it all these years, tucked away like a keepsake. Tonight, I said nothing. Let her believe her kingdom was secured. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate. If that's how you want it, I whispered, folding the napkin on the table. My chair scraped against the hardwood. The sound too loud for such a quiet dismissal. Celia lifted her glass. It's what's best. I slipped my coat from the back of the chair and walked to the door. My key warm in my palm. For years, it had been the symbol of my belonging. Now, it was only metal. Stripped of meaning, the night air pressed heavy as I stepped outside. I closed my fist around the key and whispered to no one but myself. All these years. For this, the house glowed behind me, its windows golden with light that no longer belonged to me. I began walking, suitcase wheels rattling against the sidewalk, toward a place I did not yet know. The wheels of my suitcase rattled against the cracked sidewalk, echoing too loudly in the quiet night. Each step away from that glowing house felt heavier, though I had carried far worse burdens in my life. I remembered walking home from the factory on frozen nights, pockets empty, hands raw, and yet those nights felt lighter than this one. Then, at least, I had a home waiting for me. The street curved toward the highway, where neon signs buzzed faintly in the distance. I kept my eyes fixed there, refusing to look back. A budget motel stood beside a shuttered diner, its flickering vacancy sign humming like a warning. I dragged myself through the glass door, the scent of bleach and cigarettes curling in the air. The clerk behind the counter was young, barely older than my eldest grandchild. His eyes flickered over my suitcase, my coat buttoned tight against the cold, and lingered with something that felt like pity. "We have a senior discount," he said, voice cautious, as if the word senior itself might bruise me. I forced a nod, slid cash across the counter, and took the key he offered. Humiliation settled like ash in my chest. Once, I had worked triple shifts to keep the mortgage paid, to make sure Celia never felt less than her friends. Tonight, the house I built with those shifts belonged to someone else. In the room, the wallpaper peeled at the edges, a faded pattern of flowers that had lost their color. I set my suitcase down on the thin carpet and sat on the bed, springs groaning beneath me. My eyes found the ceiling, water-stained and cracked, and memory found me. I remembered pawning my grandmother's brooch for Celia's prom dress, watching her twirl before the mirror while I wore the same dress I'd stitched for myself a dozen times. She had smiled that night, radiant, as though the world were hers. Now her words chased me through the dark. "Stranger, don't come back." I closed my eyes, the silence pressing close, and let the weight of her voice settle into me as the night stretched long ahead. The motel ceiling blurred above me, water stains spreading like old bruises. I let my eyes close, and the years folded back to a younger version of myself, a widow at 32, hair tied back beneath the harsh lights of a textile mill in North Carolina. The air had always been thick with lint, the machines pounding like hammers inside my chest. Every dollar earned there was marked by sweat and aching hands, but I carried it home as though it were treasure. At night, after Celia was asleep, I sewed by lamplight. Dresses, aprons, little bags stitched from scraps, anything I could sell at the farmer's market come Saturday morning. My fingertips bore tiny scars from needles, my back stiff from bending over fabric. But when I counted the small stack of bills, I imagined college brochures and open doors for my daughter. There was a man, once Samuel Price, a kind soul with warm eyes. He asked me to marry him after church one spring, standing among the dogwoods. For a moment, I let myself picture a life with gentleness, with laughter, but I told him no. I couldn't risk Celia ever feeling second, couldn't divide the little I had between a man and my child. He nodded with understanding, though his eyes held sorrow. Years later, my friend Margaret, sharp-tongued but loyal, had told me, "You're raising a queen, but living like a servant." I laughed then, brushing it off as envy. But tonight, her words came back with the sting of prophecy. All those sacrifices, the nights of skipped meals, the birthdays spent at work, the heirlooms pawned quietly, had they taught Celia gratitude or entitlement? Did she ever see the cost written in the lines of my face, or did she only see what she believed she deserved? I opened my eyes to the cracked ceiling once more, the question pressing against my chest like a weight I could no longer set down. The motel room was silent, except for the hum of the heater, but my phone buzzed suddenly on the nightstand, a new message lighting up the screen. A week passed in the motel, each night stretching longer than the one before. I had grown used to silence, to the ache of absence where my family should have been. Then, one morning, the motel's weak Wi-Fi stuttered to life on my old phone, and an email appeared. The subject line shouted in bold letters, "Urgent. We need to speak." It was from a law firm I recognized, the one Celia and her husband often boasted about hiring for their estate planning. My stomach tightened as I opened it. "Mrs. Anselm, we require your signature regarding the Caldwell Family Trust. Please call immediately." I read it again, then a third time, the words striking like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Require my signature. The daughter who had called me a stranger, who had slammed the door on me as though I were nothing, suddenly could not move forward without me. I packed my things and walked to the public library, its warmth and smell of paper greeting me like an old friend. I printed the email, the ink smudging faintly under my fingertips. Holding that page, I felt a strange satisfaction spread through me, not triumph, not revenge, but something steadier, proof. In my mind, I returned to the cedar chest tucked in Agnes's attic. Inside it, the deed with my name still written clearly. I had kept it all these years, though Celia never asked, never cared. She thought her locks could erase me. She forgot that paper holds memory longer than people do. I whispered, under my breath, the sound swallowed by the library's quiet. So I still matter, after all. The sentence felt unfamiliar in my mouth, like a language I had not spoken in years. Folding the paper carefully, I slid it into my bag, my hand steady for the first time in days. My phone buzzed again this time, a number I recognized all too well, lighting up the screen. I didn't call the number flashing on my phone. Instead, I tucked the printed email deeper into my bag and walked toward Sycamore Lane, where Aldous Keene lived. He had been my neighbor for decades, a retired attorney with a fondness for pipe smoke and crossword puzzles, and he had once owed my late husband a favor that was never called in. Tonight, I intended to collect, He welcomed me in with his usual dry humor, but his expression shifted when I laid the email on his desk. His hands, still steady despite the years, adjusted his glasses as he read. "Well," he said finally, "seems you hold more cards than they want you to believe." I listened as he explained the trust language, tapping key sections with a yellowed finger. I remained the primary beneficiary. No property could be sold, no assets shifted. Without my written consent, my daughter's empire balanced on the stroke of my pen. "They'll come to you," Aldous warned, "but not with honesty. They'll pretend at reconciliation. Don't believe it." His words carried the weight of experience, but what he said next sank deeper. "I've also heard things. Your daughter has been in talks with a developer out of Boston. They want the land quick, cheap, before taxes catch up. She's been pushing hard, but she can't close without you." I felt the air leave my chest. It wasn't just about control. It was about selling everything, dismantling what I had built, as though my years of labor were nothing more than bargaining chips in her game. Betrayal compounded by greed. I sat back in Aldis's chair, the hum of his old lamp filling the silence between us. The anger that once cut me raw now steadied into something colder, sharper. For the first time, I wasn't the one cornered. I folded the documents, slid them back into my bag, and stood. "Thank you, Aldis." That's all I needed. Outside, the evening air tasted different, lighter, though the night was just as cold. And before long, another invitation arrived, written not in cruelty but in false sweetness. The envelope came on a Thursday afternoon, hand-delivered by one of Celia's children. The handwriting was hers, elegant, practiced, the kind that looked more like performance than sincerity. Inside, a single line: "Dinner Saturday. Let's talk. Bring your signature." I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope, the corners pressing sharply against my fingers. Aldis's warning echoed in my mind, but so did a quiet thought of my own this time. I wouldn't arrive defeated. I went to see Dorothea, an old friend from church, and borrowed a dress I had admired on her once. Black, simple, but cut in a way that gave me height and shape. I thought I had long surrendered. When I slipped it on, the mirror returned a stranger one I was willing to become. I polished my shoes until the heels struck the floor like thunder. Saturday evening. I approached the house that once was mine. The windows glowed gold against the dusk, yet the curtains were drawn halfway, as though even the house itself was hiding in shame. My hand hovered over the brass handle before the door opened on its own. Inside, the dining table was set with polished silver, plates steaming with untouched food. My son-in-law rose stiffly, offered a nod, then sat again. The children shifted in their chairs, whispering with their eyes. Celia stood at the head of the table, her smile painted too bright. Her voice sugar where last week it had been steel. "Mother," she said, stepping forward, "let's move past last week. Families fight, but we always come back together. Just sign, and we'll be whole again." I took my seat, the silence pressing heavier than any embrace. Her words floated above the table like smoke, sweet but choking. I laid my hands flat against the tablecloth and felt the pen already waiting beside my plate. The pen lay beside my plate, its silver barrel catching the light. Celia reached across the table and slid a neat stack of papers toward me. Her voice was gentle, practiced, the kind she used with clients she wanted to impress, just a formality. "Mom." A simple signature, and all this unpleasantness disappears. I lifted the pen, turned it between my fingers, and let the room hold its breath. My daughter's eyes sparkled with certainty, convinced I would yield as I always had. Then, slowly, I set the pen back down. "Strangers don't sign papers." The words left my lips soft but sharp. slicing the air. Celia's smile faltered. Her husband's jaw tightened, and the children's wide eyes darted from one face to another, searching for cues in the silence that followed. The dishes sat untouched, steam fading into the air like promises evaporating. Celia leaned forward, her voice hardening. "Mother, don't be dramatic. This is about protecting the family, about stability." I folded my napkin carefully, smoothing the creases as though it were the most important task in the world. Then I placed it neatly beside my plate and rose. "No, Celia, this is about control, and you made your choice when you told me to consider myself a stranger. Don't be shocked when I honor it." The room seemed to shrink as I pushed my chair back. My heels struck the polished floor in measured rhythm, each step echoing like a verdict. Celia's husband muttered something under his breath, but no one stopped me. At the doorway, I paused for the briefest moment, looking back at the table where my family sat, stiff and silent, the weight of their own schemes pressing down heavier than any judgment I could deliver. Then I turned and left, the night air rushing against me like freedom I hadn't felt in years. The phone in my bag began to buzz as I walked down the drive, but I didn't reach for it, not yet. I knew desperation would not end with dinner. It was only beginning. By the end of the week, whispers had turned into headlines. The Caldwell estate was frozen. Every transaction stalled until my signature appeared. At the cafe on Main Street, neighbors leaned over their cups of coffee, voices lowered but loud enough for me to hear as I passed. All that pride. And now look at them. Couldn't even keep their own mother on their side. I kept walking, head high, though inside my chest a strange mix of sorrow and vindication churned. For years, I had been invisible in those same conversations, reduced to nothing more than Celia's mother. Now, my absence had become the story. Celia's influence waned quickly. The invitations that once filled her calendar dried up. Creditors circled like hawks, sniffing weakness where she had once strutted with confidence. My phone filled with messages, some pleading, some demanding. I forwarded every single one to Aldous, letting his steady hands guard my position. Then came the call I hadn't expected. A journalist from Hartford, her tone sharp but curious. "Mrs. Anselm, I've heard about the estate situation. Some say your daughter forced you out before this all began. Is that true?" I gripped the receiver tighter, imagining the story splashed across papers. My daughter's betrayal laid bare for strangers to consume. For a moment, the temptation glimmered. Justice by exposure, vindication in print. But I drew in a slow breath and answered simply, "No comment." The silence that followed carried more weight than any confession could. I hung up, the phone heavy in my hand, and felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. I didn't need to shout. My silence was louder than any article, sharper than any scandal. That night, I sat by the motel window, watching headlights blur across the highway. For once, I didn't replay Celia's cruel words. I replayed her desperation, the frantic voicemails, the clipped tones, the crumbling facade. The power I once begged for now rested in my hands, steady and undeniable. And I knew the next step would not be taken in cafes or whispers, but in a courtroom, where silence would echo even louder. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and dust, the kind of air that carried the weight of decisions not easily undone. I sat at the long table, my hands folded in my lap, while Celia and her husband shuffled in across the aisle. Gone were their perfect smiles, their tailored confidence. Their faces were pale, shoulders hunched as if the very walls pressed down on them. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice steady as stone. Without the beneficiary's consent, assets remain frozen. No transfers, no sales, no exceptions. His gavel tapped lightly, but the sound struck like thunder in the hollow chamber. I could feel Celia's eyes on me, burning holes into the side of my face. Finally, she turned in her seat, leaned close enough for only me to hear, and whispered, "Please, we're family." Her words might have broken me once. They might have pulled me back into her orbit of control, back into believing I was less than what I had given, but not anymore. I turned my head, looked her directly in the eyes, and spoke softly, each syllable sharpened by years of silence. "Family doesn't lock you out with a useless key." The sentence hung in the air, echoing off marble and wood. Celia's face collapsed. She covered it with her hands, her shoulders shaking, not with regret, but with the sting of losing what she thought was already hers. Across the aisle, her husband's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the table as if staring hard enough might change the truth written in the law. I sat taller than I had in years. Not because of the trust or the frozen estate, not because of the power they suddenly realized I held, but because I no longer needed theirs. The weight of their approval had finally lifted, and with it, the ache of being unseen. When the gavel struck again, I rose. Steady, heels clicking against the marble floor. The world outside those doors was waiting, and for the first time in decades, I was ready to meet it on my own terms. The lake in Maine greeted me with a stillness I hadn't known in years. Months had passed since the courthouse. Months of packing away what little I still owned and choosing not to look back at what I left behind. The cottage was small, its paint chipped in places, but it was mine. And the key on my ring fit the lock. That alone was enough. I rose with the sun each morning, slipping into the garden to tend the herbs planted in neat rows. Rosemary, thyme, a scatter of basil green things that asked for little more than water and time. Their steady growth comforted me, a reminder that not everything withers when neglected. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with a book resting on my lap. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I only listened to the loons calling across the water. The neighbors waved when they passed, calling me Miss Anselm, the strong one. I smiled at that, though strength had never been the goal. Survival had been. Peace was the reward. One night, as the last light stretched across the lake, I opened my journal. The pen moved slowly at first, then steadier, the words unspooling from a place deep within me. They called me a stranger. And now I am one, but by choice. I closed the book with care, as though sealing a chapter I no longer needed to reopen. The quiet no longer felt like exile. It felt like belonging. My days no longer orbited around others' demands or judgments. I breathed without waiting for someone to notice. I lived without waiting for permission. The world had tried to define me by rejection, but in the end, I discovered the only definition that mattered was the one I gave myself. And for the first time, I let the door close behind me without regret, the lock turning with a sound that felt less like loss and more like freedom.